Coming live from Vancouver, Canada is our guest tonight. Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights and information or simply learning from them. But before I move forward, may I request you to subscribe, follow, like, and comment on whichever platform you are watching or listening to this show on. And today we have Roger Nairn, CEO of Jar Audio, live from Vancouver, Canada.
Beautiful Vancouver.
Vancouver. Yeah. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, AJ. Thanks, everyone. Great to meet everyone.
Welcome. And Roger mainly produces lots of original podcasts for brands, and that elevates their dialogue and drive results for them. So today the topic itself is why more and more brands are embracing podcasts. And Roger, as CEO of Jar Audio, he's a specialist in this. He helps brand elevate their brand and themselves and their companies. So Roger, straightway first, the question itself, the topic itself, why more and more brands are embracing podcasts today?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we get really excited about podcasts with brands because there's no better medium to have really long, engaging relationships with your audience. These days brands are, paying for a lot of programmatic advertising on social media, but really they're just renting somebody else's audience. Why not create your own audience? Just like you and this podcast, this is your audience, and they're here to listen to you, and so you get a great opportunity to give them a ton of value through your podcast. And so brands can do the exact same thing.
Okay. So before I ask you other questions, Roger, tell us about Jar Audio itself, so that people will understand why I'm asking you these many questions on podcast itself. So that will become much more relevant. And
totally. So Jar Audio is a podcast production agency. So we are a full service agency that specializes only in producing podcasts, and we only produce podcasts for companies and organizations. So we get hired to come in and do everything from the strategy to the production to the distribution and marketing of these companies' shows. So we have teams of writers, producers, editors, sound recordists, as well as music composers, and then a full team of podcast marketers, looking at the analytics as well as trying to reach and grow the audience for the show. So we're a full service agency. We operate just like almost like an advertising agency, only we just do podcasts.
Okay. So podcast business is growing as interests of companies is growing in this particular area. Does it make a great content marketing fit, Roger?
It absolutely can, but it's really important that you're creating your podcast for your audience, not for yourself as the brand. Nobody wants to listen to a 20 or 30-minute advertisement. They want to spend time with a podcast that's delivering a ton of value, really respects your time, and really gives you a great listening experience. So if a brand can create a podcast that does those things, really truly understands who their audience is, what they need, how you can solve their problems, or provide them with a certain level of value, that audience will enjoy the show, keep coming back for more episodes. But it's really important. You have to really serve the audience, the entire time. Otherwise, they're going to get turned off and feel like they're just being sold to.
Okay, so that's a very nice point you made, Roger, that people don't want to hear shows which are like advertising. People don't want to, and that too for half an hour. You can't do that. So what should brands talk about then? What do they have enough content for that within their organization?
Well, imagine you're a brand that has a certain every brand has certain brand characteristics. Every brand has obviously value that they deliver to the world. And if you can deliver that value to a specific audience, you can create a great podcast. Perfect example is, we did a podcast for Expedia called Out Travel the System. Now, there's no better brand in the world when it comes to travel, and they understand the travel space better than anybody else. And so the show is all about how to get the most out of your travel experience. How to, take your family to Disneyland for under $2,000, or, how to travel to all the U.S. national parks with your family. Really, really, really high value content for the listener that just happens to be brought to you by Expedia. Now, same thing with American Express. We've done a podcast called Business Class, Build It Braver. It's all about helping small business owners. So, American Express wants to be known as the brand on the side of small business owners. Great opportunity for them to then create a ton of really great podcast episodes that help small business owners answer questions like, how do I scale? How do I deal with cash flow issues? How do I build a personal brand as a small business owner? How do I build a brand as a large business owner? And so the podcast is actually a really great podcast all about small business and helping small business owners. It just happens to be created by and brought to you by American Express. And same thing with Avis and Young, which is an incredibly large commercial real estate company. They created a podcast called Changing Places. It's all about the changing landscape of commercial real estate and just what COVID and the pandemic has done to the real estate world, but also just buildings and environments in general. So really, really fascinating podcast to listen to, from an audience standpoint. It just happens to be brought to you by Avis and Young and produced by Avis and Young. So again, it's not about Avis and Young. It's not about American Express. It's not about Expedia. It's about delivering a ton of value to the listener. It just happens to be brought to you by this great brand. It's branded content. It's branded content, which is not a new idea. Branded content. We've all read, native blog posts, or we've seen YouTube videos from Red Bull. This happens to be really great podcasts by brands.
Yeah, branded content, but should not be look like or heard like a branded content.
Exactly.
It should be independent content and content which your audience likes to hear.
Yeah, it's the Trojan horse.
Why do you call it a Trojan horse?
Well, the story of the Trojan horse. The horse the horse gets in the door of the gates of the castle, and then in comes in the soldiers behind them. In this case, we're making a great connection with an audience. We're having meaningful connection with the audience. It just happens to be brought to you by a brand.
Right. Do not enter sweetly. Do not barge into your audience.
Exactly. Minds. Yeah. Yes. Respect their time. I mean, I came from the advertising world, so I spent 21 years in the advertising world, right. And so much of advertising is just yelling at an audience. We see billboards and radio and TV and all these digital ads that are just sort of pushing out messages. Well, not a lot of them are bringing audiences in and spending a lot of time with them, and podcasts do a great job of that.
Okay, so do you think podcast is taking away a lot of budget for advertising, or some part of the budget for advertising? Is it a competitor sort of a thing, or is it it's complementing it?
Well, I will say that I would never recommend to a company to only do a podcast as part of their, in their marketing plan. Right. I would call a podcast as a great supplement to the other marketing that they're doing, the other, advertising pieces that they're doing. So, yes, it is taking budget away, but it's not completely replacing, digital advertising or other forms of advertising. So it's supplementing it, and is a nice sort of brand piece that lives within the larger, marketing ecosystem.
Right. Now, Roger, see, you have worked, like you talk about American Express, Expedia. You yourself have worked with big brands like Netflix, Walmart, Lamborghini, all these people, Now, talking about podcasts, now, a lot of companies are there, a lot of brands are there all over across the world. But what companies should actually, start their own podcast? Is it that everybody should start, or there are specific companies, specific sectors companies in specific sectors they should look at?
I mean, I do think that I do think that every company can start a podcast, but there are certain categories that lend themselves a little bit easier to a podcast space. You know, industries and categories and brands that have natural stories to tell. You know, retail, entertainment, tech, lend themselves quite well to podcasts because there's a natural, nice, story to tell. But I mean, if you're in the mining sector, there's some incredible stories to tell there. If you're, in any sort of renewable energy right now, incredible stories to tell there. So I wouldn't really say that there's nothing that isn't right for podcasts, but there are some that are a little bit easier than others.
That's a nice point you made about mining companies and energy companies. In fact, they seem to be so drab in terms of activities happening, and there is a lot of perception, a different sort of perception, which I guess they can tackle with podcasts, because you will have your literally your audience's ears, and then you can actually.
A podcast is great because, I have my earphones on, I'm spending time with myself, and you're literally whispering right into my ear, a story. Yes. And it's an intimate experience. It's an intimate, opportunity for a brand and their audience to connect. And I don't think there's, you can't have an intimate experience with a YouTube video. You can, but it's, you can't watch a YouTube video while you're walking your dog or running on the treadmill. You can watch a video running on the treadmill, but you're probably going to get sick. A podcast is great because it's portable. It is a much more easy to access and intimate experience. And the other part is, like, if you connect with that audience and they subscribe to your podcast or follow your podcast, they want more. They want more. They want more. Whereas the other forms of advertising, let's call it, like, print and digital, they don't want more. They're just being screamed at, and it's just it's a numbers game, and you're screaming at them. Whereas this is such an intimate, what I would call a pull medium. They're asking for that content versus you shoving it in their face. So it's just a really great medium for brands these days.
Then how do they create? How can brands or companies they can create a successful podcast? Means no one better than you to tell about this.
Well, first of all, it takes a lot of work. It's to produce a great podcast, and yourself, AJ, it's a lot of work. So I mean, the easiest thing to do is to hire a company like us. That's the easiest thing to do. But obviously that takes budget, and I understand that. If you want to create your own podcast, though, start worry less about the technical side of it and start with the why. Why are we creating a podcast? And the who, like, who is this podcast for? And then craft the strategy of what the show is going to be about around the why and the who. And then, find the right host, find the right guests, or maybe there aren't guests. Maybe it's just the host and they're, telling a story or explaining something really technical, or, just having a really interesting conversation with the audience. But if you have guests, find the guests, coordinate with them, have a great, sort of strategy for what the conversation is going to be about. And then, you need the equipment. Most of it you can get on Amazon right now, or, find it local. Great, good microphone is always something that I think is worth investing in. But even the microphone I have now is $125. It's not, it's not a massive piece of equipment. It plugs into
we are talking about companies here.
Yeah. No, I know. Yeah. So I mean, it's quite a low barrier to entry when it comes to production. But I think the more important bit is the podcast of value to your listener? And the only way you can answer that is by asking yourself, who is this for, and why does it exist? And then just really focus on delivering value, because otherwise you're going to lose your audience. They're not going to be interested.
Right. And one interesting element here is about the host. Now, should it be an insider? Should it be an outsider? Because that's that can change things.
Yeah, that's a great question. It really depends. I mean, we look at it from the standpoint of when you have an inside host, it becomes an inside conversation quite quickly. If you have an outside host, but I mean, if you have an outside host, they might not be fully knowledgeable on the topic, but they're going to be able to ask a little bit more difficult questions and poke a little bit more where perhaps an inside person wouldn't. At the end of the day, I think it's all in how you plan it out and strategize on what the podcast is going to be about, and then you'll know whether it's right to have somebody from the inside or outside. But if you do have somebody from the inside, just be really careful on who you're speaking to. You have to continually remind yourself that this is not for the company's sake. This is for the larger audience's sake. So you have to always be putting yourselves in the shoes of the audience versus the organization.
Right. In fact, there are lots of nuances in podcasts and brand podcasts, and I guess it will always get better to have a good advisor like you, or even different option is in India. I can advise to some extent.
Nice.
With whatever my knowledge is. So it's always better to have a helping hand, a second pair of hands who can be there with you to walk along. So,
yeah, it's just like hiring an advertising agency. You could probably produce that advertising in-house, but having an outside perspective is incredibly valuable.
Right, and an advertising agency is also accreditation. We're having that accreditation, so that helps. That makes your job easy, isn't it? Otherwise,
Absolutely.
you keep on. You can't communicate the way an advertising agency can do with all those big newspapers or television channels and all.
Exactly.
So, yes. So Roger, now a company decides to have a podcast and they want to roll their first podcast and it's coming on well. Then the big question is, even for non-brand podcasts like mine or anybody else, they want to grow their audience because they want to monetize it. They have their other ways of looking at things, or they want to become influencers. But for a company, earning revenues or monetization is not the focus. But audience certainly is, because they want to reach more and more people. How does a brand or a company do that in terms of growing their audience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's the paid way and then there's the organic way. So from a paid standpoint, if you have the budget, there are great opportunities to advertise your podcast on other podcasts. You can reach out to the different podcast owners and work on a deal, or you can contact the large podcast networks who have sales reps that will sell you the opportunity to do that. But we like to focus on the organic side of growing your audience. So, one of the greatest things about the podcast world is we're always working with one another to try to grow each other's shows. So we look for cross-promotional opportunities. And what that means is we create a big, long list of what we think are the other podcasts that our audience would be listening to. We then do the research to figure out who owns those podcasts. How can we get in touch with them? We then get in touch with them and we ask them, how can we work together? How can we grow each other's audiences? Because we have a similar audience. How can we grow each other's podcasts? So we enter into sort of bartering opportunities with one another. And so a cross promotion could be anything from maybe my host comes on your podcast as a guest in exchange for your host coming on our podcast as a guest.
Right.
Or maybe we take one of our episodes that, we give the MP3 file to the owner of that other podcast and they insert it in their podcast feed as a bonus episode. Or maybe we do an advertisement on their podcast in exchange for them doing one on ours. So there's really no rules when it comes to these cross-promotional opportunities. It's really about finding the right fit and just starting the conversation. The other area that we're always looking at is what are the owned channels of the organization or the brand. So, if you're a nonprofit organization, you have a massive list of volunteers. those volunteers would love to listen to your podcasts. So, send out an email blast to them, get them talking about the podcast and sharing it. Or if you're a bank, you've got branches all around the world, incorporate the podcast into signage in the in the branch locations. Or if you're a brand that has really great social channels, social media channels, of course, utilize those social media channels, sharing teasers of upcoming episodes, sharing the episode when it's live, sharing like older episodes, and sort of keeping those in people's minds. Again, it's similar to any other piece of content. You want to juice the orange as much as possible. You want to use as much of the the podcast as possible. Use old episodes, slice and dice the new ones, and create little morsels of audio that you can share on social media. And then there's other places to, that we like to look. For example, trying to get the show featured in Apple's new and noteworthy section, which is the sort of the holy grail of the podcast world, to get featured on Apple. There are ways that you can pitch Apple on having the show featured. But also the best way to get featured is to just create a great podcast.
Right.
They take notice of that. And then the other area is in the sort of PR and publicity space. So we'll create a media kit that outlines, what the show is about, who the host is, what some of the episodes and guests are all about, include some photography and things like that. We send it out to the media in hopes that they'll, write an article on the show, or perhaps on an episode that we just released, or on a certain guest. So, you kind of take it from the angle of what's right for the podcast and what's right for your specific show and brand, and leverage what you have. And if you have the budget, purchase what you don't have, and grow the show that way.
Right. Now, it will be a wide question, but let me ask you, what should be the tone of a brand podcast? Does humor work? Does it not? Then people take it because it's about your brand. I can be humorous, I can be serious, I can just change my tone, but a brand is a brand. Now, that's a very difficult question for them. So what's a general sort of an advice, what they can try, what they should not, what they should totally avoid?
Well, it really depends on the brand, because every brand has certain characteristics. So it's really about what the characteristics of the brand are. If you're a brand that can, get away with funny, then for sure, funny podcast is great. But if you need to be more serious, then that's also okay. The great thing about podcasts is you have access to all sorts of data once the show is launched. And that data leaves clues on what's working and what isn't. So test and learn. Try an episode that's a little bit more funny. Does it have a really good engagement level? Is there a really good amount of listen time in that episode? Did the audience enjoy it, or did they drop out? And all that data will tell you whether something worked or not. And it'll tell you in real time, like, pretty much right away. And so you can make decisions as you go versus, pre-baking all your decisions. It can be a little bit more flexible. So try things out, try out different tones, and you'll get to a space that the audience tells you they enjoy.
Okay. Talking of data, so let's talk about return on investment. Now, even though the investment is not huge if you look at it from a company's point of view, but in terms of a brand image and all, they are certainly quite invested in whatever communication they have in any channel. Now, so how do they measure the return on investment of any podcast that they create?
Well, again, it depends. So it depends on what's important to the organization. If you're measuring, if you want to measure conversions on your website, you can do that. There's technology now where you can add a pixel to the podcast, and you can measure. You can add a pixel to the website, and you can measure whether someone's listened to the podcast and then gone to your website and converted, into whatever you deem a conversion to be. Or if it's something at the brand level that you want to measure. When we worked with Expedia, one of their biggest KPIs was throughout the year, they would do brand pulses where they would, ask their community a bunch of questions. And one of the questions was, do you see Expedia as a helpful brand? Well, to them, they found they tied the podcast in directly to that question. And so they knew the podcast was working if the audience was telling them that they see Expedia as a more helpful brand than previous. It again really depends on the brand. Technology has allowed us to measure a ton. It's not perfect. It's still, we're still building tools and growing. But again, it's never really been an easy question when it comes to branded content and how do you measure the ROI of it. But it can be easy if you know specifically sort of what you're looking for.
Okay. So my last question, Roger, is about how the industry is shaping up now. Almost everybody is saying that video is the way to go, and podcasts are mostly about audio. That's the general perception is. But then you see how strongly YouTube is pushing for podcasts. On the other side, you have Spotify pushing for video. It has already launched. Okay. Substack, which was more of text, has gone towards podcasts strongly. They have recently got a few people from Patreon and all those. Some people have shifted from that. So this shift will happen. And also Substack is in beta phase with a video. So everybody is more or less in video, and that is to a great extent is there to stay. Many people like to be in video, just like I am. I am on audio. All the top podcasts of the world, it is going to be there. But video, we are live. It's like living life, in real time. And we are live on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and a lot of other places if my facility would have allowed me. So how do you see the future for podcast as such? Video, audio, brands, what should they try to choose? What they should try to experiment? What is good for them?
Yeah. So the answer to the question is I think both are going to just continue to see growth because they're different. They're different mediums. We talked earlier about the intimacy of listening to a podcast. You don't get that with video, but obviously you get visuals with a video, and you don't get that with a podcast. So we're doing both, to be honest. We're recording our interviews and putting them on YouTube. We're also taking our interviews and creating, animation and graphics and putting them on YouTube as well. So I don't think that it's one or the other. I think it's both. I will say that the actual production side of video is a lot more complex than audio. Yes. For example, if you record a bunch of video and you make a mistake, or you need to edit something, it's not as easy as it is with audio to edit. And so the content gets stale quicker because it's not as, you got to figure out the lighting, you got to figure out the environment you're in, you got to get so it's just not an easy thing to do. So I think it's going to continue to see growth in both areas. I don't think we'll get to the point where, we'll never see just one or the other. I think in the same case as what Substack's doing with the written word to audio to video, I don't think the written word's going to go away. I think it will. I think it will just be a supplemented piece. And the most important thing is that great stories are being told, great conversations are being had, tons of values being delivered to audiences. But I think it's going to be a number of different mediums in which it's delivered.
Yes, and you see, Medium has added another thing that is again in beta testing is that some robot or whatever, it will read out whatever text is there. So it's another way of podcast. The text is getting read by somebody else.
Yeah, what we're doing a lot of that now too, where we're doing like audio blogs, where we're taking companies' existing blog and turning it into audio formats so that it's accessible to those that can't see, but also executives really enjoy listening to audio because it allows them to, drive to work and listen to that blog post versus read it, drive to work and listen to that news article versus read it, or, go about their day and sort of be as mobile as possible while still absorbing and retaining all that information.
Right. In fact, you see, podcasts have become a very important tool today. Spotify's microphone, I guess they own microphone, so they have stopped
Megaphone.
Megaphone, yes.
Yeah.
Megaphone, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So they have stopped now. Listeners in Russia will not be able to listen to that. So you see, it has become part of the larger global sort of thing that is going on. And for companies, as you said, as you can understand, it's such a potent tool to have, not in terms of those larger global discussions that happens, but obviously in connecting with audience. I wonder, Roger, how as a company for you, because next say 1 year will be very strong or very fast moving for the podcast industry. As a company, how are you managing so many changes that are happening everywhere, either it's Spotify, YouTube, Substack, or anywhere else? Because the demands of clients are different. The demands of clients are changing with every passing day. How do you do? That's my last question.
Yeah, no, it is difficult to keep on top of everything because it is changing all the time. It's kind of overwhelming sometimes. But we are on top of everything. We are aware of new technology and trends. So taking advantage of the ones that we think are going to deliver value to our clients. But I think the most important thing is being really true to the great storytelling is paramount. Doesn't matter what tools and what formats and all that stuff out there. At the end of the day, if you're not able to tell a great story or you're not able to deliver value to your listeners, it kind of doesn't matter. So yes, we're utilizing all the new tech and tricks and ways of doing things, but we're also staying true to the roots of what's going to make a good podcast.
Great. So at the end of the day, it's actually storytelling that matters.
At the end of the day, it's storytelling and delivering value to the listener.
Right.
Yeah.
With this, it's a wrap on this edition of the KJ Masterclass. Thank you so much, Roger, for joining in.
Thanks, AJ. Thanks, everyone.